So Steve gave a bunch of background on me, so I'm gonna pass on that. Only to say I do this primarily on the corporate side, but today talking about it more from a personal level, right? So we all know corporations are doing what they're supposed to do and keeping your information safe and have well-built security programs, and they never make mistakes like Equifax, whatever. So, you know, what do you need to do on your side to react to that, to protect your data in the things that you do every day? That's what we'll talk about today. And so here's 3 things that we'll look at today. One is some of the threats, some of the things that happen, right? So we all know there's hackers, there's bad guys, but what exactly are they doing? Why are they doing it? What can you expect to see in your inbox or on your screen that might be signs of an attack? So you can be vigilant and see those things and recognize them for what they are. Second is we'll talk about some tools. So tools you may purchase, services you may use, features you may already have but maybe aren't using to best advantage. So I'll talk about a few of those that are kind of at the top of the list for me. And then last part, some of the critical behaviors. So if you've bought the right tools or employed the right tools, there's a lot still dependent on what you do when you see something and how you react to it. So we'll talk about some of those behaviors. So first, the threats. What's going on? There was a day when most of the threats, the hackers, were kids trying to make a point, right? College students, researchers, people trying to test the feasibility of exploiting computers, which at the time were new and there was a lot of unplowed ground as far as how you might use or abuse them. So a lot of the things we saw in early viruses were disruptive or nuisance. Now what we're seeing is flat out crime. It's people who decided that selling drugs was a good way to die or get thrown in jail, so now they've decided they could steal your money some other way. Criminals, whether they deal drugs or steal credit card data, they're just trying to make money, right? I mean, drug dealers aren't because they think everybody should have great drugs. Maybe some are, but most of them are just trying to make a profit. And that's what we're seeing in the cybersecurity space too. The people who are doing this are just trying to make a profit. It's fairly clean crime. You do it by remote control. Your chances of getting caught and thrown in jail are much lower than some other kinds of physical crime. Your chances of getting shot by a competitor are much, much lower. So it's a much safer occupation. So we've seen a lot of criminals moving in that direction. How it impacts you is it comes as in the form typically of scams, people trying to steal your money, people trying to get your personal information so that they can then later use it to steal your money or steal somebody else's money, or gain control of your computers. So why would they want to do that? Often it's so that they can steal your data, steal your money. Also, the computer has value maybe to attack somebody else, right? So there's been sort of zombie things where people will round up 1 million or so innocent victims' computers and then use them to attack a big target that might be hard to attack without a lot of resources. So those are kind of what they're up to. How they might do that. Malicious software, I've got a few slides later that talk about this in a little more detail, so we'll dive in. You've all heard of viruses. There's a lot of variations on that theme in terms of what software can do and how people take advantage of it to do things that are not good. Spam email. In the some days past, this was again just people trying to sell you some stuff you didn't need. A certain percentage fell for it. Most of that innocent spam is filtered out now. So for somebody to get spam that's truly malicious through the spam filters, they have to put some work into it. And that means they're not going to just do it to sell, $10 junk. They're going to do it because they feel like they're going to get some reasonable number of people to fall for an exploit that's going to make them some money. Data theft. If your workstation that you're using, your laptop, your phone is not that well protected, there's data that can be taken directly from that. So it could be your personal data that people want access to. And we'll talk a little bit about wireless networks. It's an avenue to eavesdrop, to see what people are doing, to maybe intercept their sensitive communications, their passwords, again, usually for some later exploitation. A few themes we're going to see kind of repeat throughout the day today in this conversation. where you go and what you do certainly matters, right? So using caution in the websites you visit, and email that you get is the most common way that stuff starts, right? So email comes in, you believe it even though it's fake, and you take some action because of that. So the malicious software that's out there, again, viruses are what people sort of generically think of, but there's a lot of different flavors of that. I think the kind of, as you think about malicious software, you say, well, I have antivirus, then I won't get any of those things. There's too many variations, too much sophistication, too much work going into how to evade antivirus filters. So yes, they're valuable, and yes, you should have one, and we'll talk a little bit later about what they do for you, but they don't solve all your problems. And so there are some other kinds of attacks that may still happen. I'll mention a couple of items off this slide. Ransomware is fairly new, last few years. What it does is it takes all the files on your computer and encrypts them, scrambles them so that you can't read them anymore, and then you get a ransom note that says, if you'd like access to your files back, send me some money. So the question is this real? Does it work? It's absolutely real. They have actually scrambled your files. If you pay them, they will descramble them for you. It's a moneymaker, right? They're not trying to damage your files. They're trying to get you to pay them a check. So it works for you and them. On the other hand, if you have a copy of those files somewhere else that didn't get scrambled, you could just abandon the scrambled ones and not send them a check, and you'll be fine. If you wonder, could I figure out a way to unscramble those without paying them? The answer is no. It's not technically possible. Best expert out there can't do it. If you don't have a copy of the data somewhere else, you kind of got to pay. At the corporate level, sometimes it's hundreds or thousands of dollars. On the personal level, it's usually affordable, traffic ticket kind of size prices. But again, we'll talk today about some strategies you can use to make sure you don't have to write that check. Spyware, adware, see a lot of buzz. Yes, sir.
One question on ransomware, would that, to me it would imply that they would have access to your files and would be able to use whatever passwords are in your files, whatever, is that part of it also? In other words, it seems to me that unscrambling them doesn't solve the problem. Does that make sense?
Yeah, so to your point, if they could scramble them, they could also read them, right? And steal them. And the answer is, yeah, they could, but for whatever reason, they don't, right? I mean, they've found a way to make some money with this fairly simple attack. They've got a tool that does the scrambling, and so they do that. If they steal your data, they got to sort it out. They got to take your pictures of your kids and, the checks you wrote and your tax returns and figure out how to make money out of that. So it's just a sort of more direct attack to say, hey, I scrambled them, now pay me. And I'll unscramble them. But yes, they could theoretically do anything with those files. Yes, sir?
Does it go to your backup if you have hard disk backup or cloud backup or something like that? Do these programs go to there, or is it primarily on your computer?
They will go to anything that's attached at the time that scrambling is going on. So in a corporate environment, it's a big deal, right? If people have their corporate network set up wrong, and a ransomware gets one computer, it will go to all their shares, all their network shares, and encrypt those. So if you have it set up in a very open way where maybe 1,000 employees share one big share drive, all that data can get scrambled. So on a personal level, yeah, if you have auxiliary disks or other things plugged in, and there's data that your backup copy, for instance, you've got your primary on your computer and a backup on a removable hard drive sitting on your desk, if it's plugged in while that's happening, it may reach out and scramble those files too. Big problem. The other potential problem along those same lines is if you have like a sync software like Dropbox. Automatically syncs in real time. So if all your files get scrambled, Dropbox will dutifully copy the scrambled files to the Dropbox copy. Now you've got two scrambled copies. The good thing with Dropbox or those kinds of services is they'll let you roll back to a previous version. So you could go in there and say, all right, roll all my files back one version to before the scrambling happened. It works. It's slow and painful. It's one file at a time, right? So your life is more convenient if you had another copy offline that didn't get scrambled, but you can retrieve it from that. But yeah, you got to be careful what you leave hooked up. So if you have that backup hooked up all the time, it could be victimized as well.
So the solution, unplug.
Unplug, right. If you're doing it on a local backup, unplug. If you're doing it, say Dropbox or sync software, that's great for what it does. I use Dropbox, I love it. Make another copy, archival, that's backed up to some offline storage. Could be cloud service that you get, the Carbonite, other kind of backup sort, or removable hard drive. You can just plug it in, make your copy, unplug it. It's very safe sitting in your desk drawer. Any other question on that? These are kind of the levels of compromise. If you think about what happens on your computer and how it can go from bad to worse, some different levels. So at the lowest level are these things called web bugs or beacons, web beacons. And if you think about, people talk about spyware, kind of watching what you're doing. That's what these things do. So they do what a beacon or a buoy would do. They give notice that you have activated them. So let's say you get an email and you open it and read it, or you visit a website and they have a web bug on them. It will report back to its owner, its mothership, and say, hey, message was received. This user read this message. So to the attacker, that means a couple of things. One, you're a real human who reads his email, not just a machine somewhere. Number two, they were able to get by the spam filters put up by your email provider, Microsoft or Google or whoever. So that tells them something. It doesn't give them any access to your data per se, but it lets them know that you are potentially a viable target for some other scamming activity. Like I say, you're a real human and they could potentially try to exploit you. So for the most part, you're not going to see these. They exist for all kinds of legitimate reasons like marketing, tracking, and that sort of thing. Some of it gets filtered out by spam filters. Some of it doesn't. There's no real defense against it. It's not something per se to worry about, but it is kind of the first step. So I guess the number one thing I would say is if you see emails in your inbox and they don't seem to be legitimate and they don't seem to be of interest, don't read them, right? Let them go by the wayside. Much more of this is caught by the spam filters than it used to be, but you'll still see things sneak through. And again, if you can pretty much tell by the from line and the subject line that it's useless, don't be curious, just delete it. If you do open it, you probably activate the web bug again, not a crisis in and of itself. Level two is where there's some personal information that you provided. Next slide, I'll show a screenshot, kind of show an example of this, but the basic concept is you voluntarily give some of your personal information by entering it into a form on a web page. Phishing, those kinds of attacks, I'll show a little anatomy of how that works. If you do that, it's targeted. Somebody's collecting that information for a reason. They're going to use it for something. So that's a fairly serious compromise. If you do that, you've been tricked, right? I mean, you're not going to do it on purpose. You're going to do it because you think it's legitimate and you don't realize until too late that it was an attempt to get some personal info. Third level is where some actual software gets installed or executed on your computer, either with your involvement or without your involvement. I'll talk a little bit about how that might happen without your involvement in a minute. At that point, the hacker term is pwned, which is spelled, as you might imagine, P-W-N-E-D, because that's how hackers spell things. And that means they own you. They own your computer. And a gentleman asked about ransomware. Well, couldn't it do these other things? The answer is yeah. Once you have installed software on your machine, it can literally do anything that you can do. So that's a pretty serious level. And once you get to that stage, there's not a lot of going back. There's virus programs that will clean up. There's malware cleaning. When I get to the tools discussion, I'll talk a little bit about that. But a lot of times, you're at the point of basically rebuilding your machine. Some people literally will go buy a new computer at that point, right? I think that might be overkill. It's usually an excuse if you're having trouble with the budget. Yes, ma'am.
I have a question about unsubscribing to something, because I
Okay.
remember that when you do that, it's just giving them notice that they actually got you, that they actually contacted you, and so you're a viable. So now I'm scared to unsubscribe to any, you get that, so it's like, well, is this a good one to hit or not?
Yeah, good question. If it's not something that you know you're subscribed to and trust, let's say you're subscribed to your kid's Little League and now your kid has gone off to high school and doesn't play Little League anymore. Totally legit. Hit the button, unsubscribe. If it's something that you don't know what it is, I would not hit that button, right? Just delete it, and yes, you won't be unsubscribed, so you may get more, but actually you may get less, right? Hitting that button tells them you're alive and an active human, and so you may end up now with a targeted attack coming your way. So I would say, yeah, only unsubscribe when it's something that you know who and what it is. Yes, sir?
Blocking it.
Yeah, you can block it. So a lot of email clients will say, label this as spam or block this sender so that I don't get anything more from that address. That's definitely a good thing to do. You're not interacting with the email when you do that. You're just telling your mail client what to do. So you don't give the signal back that she was worried about, but you don't see any more of them. So that's a good thing to do. Yeah. Yes, ma'am.
Is there any greater risk with a PC versus a Mac for all of this kind of stuff?
For a long time, there wasn't a lot of attacks on Apple, and they sort of marketed that, right? That the Windows had all these bugs and all these viruses and all that kind of thing. But, you know, the reality is their software is not magically better than Microsoft's. I think they do put some care into it, but the problem was that the attackers weren't going after it because they had such small market share. Well, now that their market share has grown, they're getting attacked like anybody else, right? So that's true for iPhones, for Apples, et cetera. Like I say, their problem before was obscurity. They weren't a great target. That advantage is not anymore. So here's a quick walkthrough of how phishing works. Phishing is another hacker term spelled the way you might expect with a PH. And so if they want to attack you, what do, right? They start by building a fake website like the one at the right. I don't know how well you can see that. I looked at it earlier. It was a little fuzzy. Still a little fuzzy. We had them work on the projector a little bit, focus, but it didn't totally fix my graphics issues for me. So they'll build a website like the one on the right. In this case, Chase Bank, I think the previous presenter told us is one of the top 3 banks. So nothing against them, it's just that if you're well-known and have a well-known public image, maybe a trusted public image because you are a reputable company, that makes you a great target for these kind of attacks. People are more likely to believe something if it comes from somebody that they actually do business with. So if you're a Wells Fargo customer and you got the email on the left that said, someone has reset your password at Chase, you would easily ignore that, right? But if you're a Chase customer, you might think it's real. So number 2 step is they'll send out thousands of those emails like the one on the left that says, hey, something that's going to get your attention. In this case, the example says your password has been changed. So you think, hey, I'm a Chase customer. I didn't change my password. That must be somebody trying to hack my account because I just went to that Ed Bassett speech and he told me to be wary of that stuff. I bet that's what happened. I better go to Chase and make sure I lock everything down. So you click on the link and it brings up the fake website where you enter in some information. That screen is asking for your user ID and password, not surprising, right? So you enter it in. That gets collected by the attacker and they then sell that. So how do you defend against that? The easy answer is, if you believe that, well, if you don't believe it, for sure, just delete it. That's easy, right? So if you're not a Chase customer or you think it looks like it's got misspellings or some otherwise looks suspicious, just ignore it. Or, wait and see. If you believe it, though, that somebody might have tried to hack your Chase account, don't click the link that they give you. Just go to the Chase website, type www.chase.com, log in the normal way, and report it to them, report to their fraud department, et cetera. Yes, sir?
Would this look identical to what I have from my bank? If I log into my regular bank account, or can you do the same exact stuff?
They can look like this one on the right. I mean, I'm a Chase customer. That's pretty much what it looks like. They use all the same graphics, right? It's very similar. So in the old days, misspellings. I mean, these were, people working offshore. They were kind of amateurs, whatever. Now they're not. They're making money. They're well paid. They have time to hire graphic artists to make this stuff look good. So it does.
So they can change the link so that it looks just like the authentic link?
Yeah, so here's the tricky bit that's going on there. And this link right here, where's the link?
Where it comes
This doesn't have it. You can't see the
from.
link.
Where
Sorry.
it comes from.
Of where it comes from? Yes, that can be pretty much anything you want. So that can be spoofed quite easily. And some mail clients will flag things that look legit and some that don't, but it's very difficult to trust what it says right there. It's easily spoofed. And then when they put a link in here, which unfortunately is not, oh yeah, down here, click account here. So all that says is here. You don't know where that goes. It doesn't say Chase, right? So let's say that instead of saying here it said www.chase.com, would you believe it then? No. The same way they can make it say H-E-R-E, they can make it say chase.com. It has nothing to do with where the link leads you to. So that's the key. If you could unravel that and look at the source code, you'd see that that was some fake website name up here, right? So that's the risk. So again, the easy defense is don't click on it directly. Just go to your bank's website or other website that you know and do your business that way. One less convenience, right? Because you instead of clicking, you have to type something in, but much, much safer. Now you know where you're going. You're initiating the transaction. So what do people do to try to trick? We talked about a few of these. There's a couple others in here that I'll mention. Rogue security software. So this thing that says, your machine has been infected by a virus. You should take our free tool, which will clean your machine and make your life wonderful. Well, the reality is your machine is not infected by a virus until you click that link and install their tool. Then it is. So no, don't believe that. Nobody's giving that stuff away. Nobody's going to try to warn you that your machine's infected and then give you a free product to fix it. Not that viable. Sometimes they try to make it more believable by, instead of giving you a free tool, making you pay for the tool. Now they've done two things. They got a check and they install their software on your machine. So yeah, be very careful. Buy your software from a reputable source, not some unsolicited thing, right? Even if it does seem to be helpful. Adjacent websites, this is pretty tricky. If you mistype a website, a lot of times you'll get a website that clearly looks nothing like the one you wanted. Sometimes offensive, sometimes clearly spam, but sometimes it could look just like the one you were expecting, and then you might just log in. Now you've given your user ID and password to the other site. So large companies defend against this by buying up all those similar sounding domain names, typical misspellings or words added on or something like that. So like Amazon might buy AmazonPrime.com and just magically redirect you to their real site. But smaller companies a lot of times don't do that, don't have the means to do it, or the security program in place to do it. So mistyping can take you down a path. That's a tougher one. That's your mistake, right? So how do you do that? One easy way, we'll talk about password management and password wallets in a minute. If you've stored your password for your bank in a password wallet along with the proper URL, and instead of typing it in every time where you might misspell it, you click on the wallet link, you're always going to go to the right place, always going to put in the right user ID and password. Simpler, too. What else? Masquerading hotspots. When you go to Starbucks and you want to use the Wi-Fi, do you use the one called Starbucks or the one called Starbucks 32 or the one called free Wi-Fi, right? Hard to say. So the answer is using that is safe if you're using the real one, but if you're using one that's on some other customer's phone that they just turned on and called Starbucks 32, they could be eavesdropping on your conversation. So best advice there is look for the sticker on the wall that says the name of their Wi-Fi. Ask someone, ask a person at the place, what is your Wi-Fi and what's the Wi-Fi password, and make sure that you're using their legitimate one. Found devices in the bottom there. If you find USB sticks or other little things and you think maybe they would have some interesting stuff on there, just buy one for $5. It's better. How many people have heard of 0 day? It's kind of a geeky term, right? It's not like in the news like phishing and viruses and stuff like that. 0 day bugs are bugs that are found by the bad guys before they're found by the good guys. It's kind of the short answer of it. And they're particularly insidious because, like all the stuff we've talked about up to this point, involved you doing some action. And that means that if you're careful, you can avoid those actions for the most part. These are technical vulnerabilities that if you have them on your machine, somebody can potentially exploit that without you doing anything at all. So all the software you have, all the software that's commercially available, even Apple, was asked about, has bugs in it, hundreds, right? When you hear about new bugs being discovered, they're not new, they're just newly discovered. So software is put out, it's millions of lines of code developed by hundreds of people, it has problems. The vendors don't necessarily find these problems, researchers find them. Some of those researchers work for the good guys, in which case they tell the vendor and the vendor fixes it, usually the next day or two. If the bad guys find it first, they will go sell that on the black market to someone who wants to exploit that. So zero-day vulnerabilities in popular software bring a pretty good penny on the black market. So how that works, like I say, the key for you is that if you have these vulnerabilities on your machine, somebody could potentially exploit them without your knowledge, without you having to do anything or install some software. Corporate people have programs in place to make sure that they find and patch these things as fast as they're announced. So zero-day refers to the fact that there's a certain window before it's known in the world, and that first day that it's known in the world is day one. So on zero-day, which could last for a long time, there's a long window to exploit. But as soon as exploitation starts, people notice, they report it, it gets fixed. Those days have become very short, 1 or 2. So in the corporate world, they're going to fix those things quickly. On a home computer, if you don't patch or update your software, you may have a exploitable vulnerability that people know about and are actively exploiting on there for months. And that's very risky, right? So the people who exploit these will use automated tools to search the internet for machines that have the vulnerability and then exploit them. When you're at home, you're somewhat protected because you're behind your internet service provider router, and that has some protection against inbound connections. But if you're visiting websites, you're going places, now you have a connection, they can probe your machine and see if you have these vulnerabilities. The easy answer to how to stay safe with that is turn on the automatic updates of your software. So your operating system, the applications you use. Nowadays, most software has an automatic update feature. It's very safe. In the corporate world, it makes people nervous because things change without notice. And that makes the IT support people, so they want to control it. They want to decide when things get updated. But for a home user, you don't want to do that. You don't want to be reading the internet every day to see if there's vulnerabilities in your software. So turn on the automatic and make it stay safe as much as the vendor can stay ahead of those vulnerabilities. Second suggestion would be if you've got software on your machine that you're not using, actively using, either disable it, or if you're really not using it at all, uninstall it. And I would say housekeeping like that, that's my biggest weakness I have on this computer right here, is I have stuff on here I don't use. Skype, I don't know, I'm not using Skype anymore. I'm using other things, but it's still sitting there. It still loads every time I boot my machine. If a vulnerability comes along, I'm exposing myself to that even though I don't need the software. So I should go home this afternoon and do a little more housekeeping. The pro tip about that is taking that stuff off of there that loads automatically every time you run your machine, it'll make your machine go faster. So if it's starting to slow down and you think, hey, maybe I got infected by a virus, well, maybe you just need to clean out your closet, right? Start with that. And that may actually prevent you from getting infected by a virus in the future. So that's it on the threats. I'm going to talk about tools. I'm going to talk about behaviors. So any questions on the threat side before I slide ahead? Okay. So this is kind of the toolkit, the things that you want to have. Again, some of these you may already own. We'll talk on the next slide about configurations, features you want to take advantage of. This is about specific tools. So the first one is backup. We've had a little conversation about that before. Cloud solutions, Dropbox, hard drive that you disconnect when you're not using it. So first thing is make sure that you have a really good backup solution. Make sure then that you find a second one because they're cheap, they're free nowadays, right? Dropbox is free. Storing your pictures at Amazon or Google, free. Lots of places to store the stuff you want in the cloud. And so I guess obvious question is, should you trust the cloud, right? Should you trust Dropbox and Google Drive and those kind of things? And I would suggest that even though you hear stories like Equifax being hacked or Sony being hacked, I would say the chances of those cloud providers being hacked versus your own personal PC, they're probably putting more energy and money into it than you are. So the cloud is safer, I think. It's not perfect, as we've seen. We've seen some big breaches of some fairly name brand folks. So there's some risk there. But, you know, your personal computer is subject to a lot of things. We're talking about several of them here today. Even if you take all my advice, which even I don't take all my advice, so even if you do that, I think there's still some risk there. So a combination of the above is good, right? Put some of your stuff in the cloud. Again, it's free, it's easy. It's got version rollback capabilities. Put some stuff on a removable hard drive. They cost $100. You can store them in your closet or your file cabinet, and it's there when you need it. There used to be a time when you had to put stuff on DVDs or CDs or, you know, kind of complex things. Now, storage space has become so available, so cheap, that having 2-3 copies is no longer a cost factor. And if you use automated software to do it, it's not some manual thing that you got to do. We talked already about real-time sync and the fact that if you have the backup storage connected to your machine and you have a problem where your files get corrupted by ransomware or something else, that could corrupt your backup. So I would say for one of your 2 backups, make sure it's offline, not connected on a daily basis. Number 2 is laptop, desktop security software. So the Nortons, the Symantec's, the antivirus software. These have gone beyond antivirus and have a whole bunch of things in them to help keep your computer safe. They're not foolproof. They're not a silver bullet. They're not real cheap either. So maybe it's $100 and you can protect 3 or 5 machines, depends on the vendor. I would suggest it's worth paying that money. A lot of new machines come with it and then it expires after a year, then they want you to send them a check. I think it's worth doing. How many people here have Comcast as their internet service provider? Most. So they give away Norton Security Suite for free to all their customers. Not free, you have to pay your cable bill every month, so that's not free. But they give you that software for free. It's one of the best in the market. It's full featured. You just go to the Comcast website and download it. So that will save you $100 and it's good protection.
Is that for Mac also?
I believe they have a Mac version. I'm not sure. I'm not a Mac user, but I would check. I think so.
Norton has a Mac.
Yep. If you don't have that Comcast, check with your internet service provider, see if they offer something. If not, I would suggest that any of those, you know, name brand folks are worth checking out and paying the money for. Yes, sir.
What is your opinion of Microsoft Security Essentials?
Using that alone all by itself, it's getting a lot better. So recently they've kind of bundled a bunch of stuff into that. Honestly, I've been using now the Norton because I get it from Comcast for free for enough years that I haven't evaluated any other options for me personally, right? And on a corporate level, you know, we're looking at more enterprise solutions for my professional work. So I don't know exactly where Essentials is at today. Some years ago, it was definitely not adequate, but they kept buying and bundling other parts in and adding more to that picture. Today, it might do everything you need. So I guess I can't give a recommendation, yes or no. It's free. It's got that going for it. Kaspersky, also free, but I think they just figured out the Russians are running that show. So, sorry, not talk about any specific products here today. What's that? Not a shocker, yeah. I'll just say that the federal government stopped using them. Next one, password manager. I mentioned briefly, but I think we'll dive in a little bit more onto this now. Password wallets, there's a lot of them out there. There's some work as websites and as a cloud service. Some of them are software that you buy and install on your machine. Some are free, some cost a few bucks, they're not expensive. There's some very good ones out there, and I would suggest, rather than me suggesting specific name brands, there's some very good reviews that will compare them, and it's more a matter of what's the best fit for your needs. Any of the top handful, 8 or 10, do the job. And what they do is they store all your passwords in one file. They encrypt that file with a password you choose, so you only have to remember one password, and all your other passwords are in there. That password that you remember, you type in to your computer, and that's the only place it goes, so it stays pretty safe. I mentioned earlier you can store the website address in there too, so you take the full address of the login page and put that into the wallet along with your user ID and password, and now you have kind of one-click access and very safe. Definitely suggested versus the alternatives. I mean, if you want to write them down on a piece of paper and store them in a safe place, that's great, right? That's if you're all about handwriting stuff, I think that's a safe way to do it. To me, I have too many passwords and they change too often and it's not practical. Yes, ma'am.
I just have a question. So the password manager is actually on another site and you have to log into it?
There's
Does it reside on?
There's both kinds. So the one I use, for example, is software that only sits on my computer,
That's what I like.
and it'll sync with other computers that I own, right? So I can keep multiple copies of it, but it's just me. Yeah, I bought it. Yeah, it's $35, maybe $50. There are some web services though where you can go to their website and store all your passwords there. You're really trusting the cloud in that case. I mean,
I don't trust it.
yeah.
So I can sit on my computer, I trust.
Yeah.
One point of failure is, knowing the password to get into your password vault.
So that's a key. And I would say, one, make a couple copies of, once you have that wallet, you've got this encrypted file, make sure you have plenty of copies of that, because you don't really want to lose all your passwords on the same day. That will make you sad, right? And then have the password written down, stuck in your file cabinet someplace safe so that, you can find it. If you're disabled, somebody who's doing your affairs can find it, that kind of thing. So, yeah, you don't want to lose your own data by locking it away too much, right? One advantage I found in using a password manager now for many years is it makes it a lot easier for me to pick crazy passwords, completely random. I'll let the password manager generate my passwords for me. You click a button, it gives me 12 characters that look like gobbledygook. I paste it in. I don't ever type it. Now, if I have a password that I have to type because I'm going to enter it on my phone or something like that, so, something where I'm going to need some mobile access and I have to manually type it, I'll choose one that's somewhat, human typable at least. But for things like my LPL account, account view, whatever that's called, it's completely random, 12 or 14 characters. Nobody's going to guess that ever. So that makes it easy to do that and easy to avoid trying to choose variations on a theme or things that you can remember. Encryption software, this is a point of great debate in the corporate world and in the personal side. How much is it worth to really encrypt all your data? One of the risks is what the woman just asked about the password vault. If you encrypt all your data and then you forget the password, well, now you've just stolen your own data from yourself. You're not having a good day. So encrypting data, I would say, think about it. Be careful what you do. Things like your phone. I have my phone set so that when I power it on, I have to enter a password to basically decrypt my data. So that means if somebody steals my phone and they have to enter my password or they can't get my data, right? It's not complicated. I want to type it in pretty fast, but I don't want it to be easy for somebody. Same on the laptop, right? I carry it around with me all over the place. If it gets stolen, I don't want somebody to be able to just plug in their hacker tools and take my data. If you have data stored on a hard drive at home or you have data on a desktop that somebody has to break in your house to steal, much less worried about it. You can encrypt individual files. You can encrypt your whole hard drive. The tools to do it are free or cheap. I would say, again, consider it for things that you really care about from the perspective of somebody actually stealing them. Like they walk up to your laptop and take it. What's on there that you're worried about? The pictures of your family? Your concern there is that you have a copy, not that they stole them. So what if they're looking at your family, right? Your tax returns, your personal financial data, that's something they might exploit to their benefit. Yeah, I would, think pretty seriously about making sure that that's protected. Number 5, if you get a virus, you get some malicious software, you see some obvious signs of it, maybe your antivirus tells you, maybe your machine starts doing weird things, maybe you get a ransomware notice. Do you try to fix that? There's some really good tools out there to do it. Some are free, some are relatively inexpensive. There's services that will offer to try to fix it for you for more money than it makes sense to pay. Personally, I prefer just to take my computer and rebuild it back to the factory, because that's fairly easy. Again, if my computer's getting old and I can't get my wife to let me buy a new one, that's a great reason to say, hey, I just got to buy a new laptop. We've all done it. And, and then, but if it's not at that stage, calling up Dell or Apple or whoever you bought your computer from and saying, hey, I need to get a virus off my computer, that conversation is not going to go well. If you call them up and say, I need to do a factory reset to my computer to take it back to the day I bought it, almost all of them will walk you through it. The software to do it is already on your machine in most cases, and they will walk you through the sequence of steps on the phone. Now, you lose all your data. It's wiped clean. It's back to the day you bought it. If you have good backups, your data is readily available, that's not too big of a deal. This is probably a day or two. It's not pleasant, but on the other side, trying to buy esoteric software that cleans your machine and make it work and make sure you've really gotten the thing done right, I would say unless you're geeky enough to probably be wasting your time in this presentation, I wouldn't go down that path. These are some features that you have today that is good to take advantage of. So the first one I'll mention, number one for sure, at the top of the list, is this thing called two-step verification on Facebook, Google, whatever you use online. If they offer two-step verification, highly recommend you take the time to set that up. It's only inconvenient that one time. So the way two-factor or two-step verification works is anytime a new computer tries to log into your account, the person has to also enter a code which they send to your cell phone by text message. After that, so for your daily use, once you've gotten your computer and your phone and your kid's computer all registered with the two-step verification, you stay logged in. You use Facebook the same way you always do, so it doesn't inconvenience you on a daily basis. But if somebody tries to hack your account by whatever means, they have to guess your password and steal your phone, which dramatically raises the difficulty of that attack. So again, it's a little bit of a pain to set it up. You have the risk of locking yourself out of your account. So they all offer some backup methods. You put in your spouse's email, your kid's email, whatever, so that if you can't get the code somehow, you have a way to prove your identity and get in. So it's worth going through those steps and setting it up. Next one is automatic updates. I talked about that, making sure that your software is set to update automatically. Definitely, a good thing and worth doing. Browser settings. Most of the browsers that you use today for web browsing are set up pretty well in their default configuration. You'll hear about Java, Flash, JavaScript. So I'll just talk about those couple real quick. JavaScript is used widely by everybody. So if you disable JavaScript, you can't live on the internet. So you're not going to get rid of it. You could set JavaScript to ask you permission every time a new site wants to run it. And after a while, all your sites that you go to will get memorized and you won't have to answer that question again. It's kind of problematic though still. So unless you're pretty careful, I would say you're probably okay and reasonable to just leave JavaScript running. Java, on the other hand, which sounds the same but it's not the same, has a bunch of problems. And Flash, which is used for displaying videos, it's largely been outmoded, so it's mostly older sites that use it. I would say disable those, block those, unless you have a specific reason. If some website you use all the time doesn't work when you do that, then you can think about ways to get around that, trusting that only that one site, installing Java outside your browser instead of as a plugin. There's some ways, but for most of us, probably 95%, you can disable them and your life will continue as is. Router Wi-Fi, so if you're renting your router from your internet service provider, Comcast or whoever, chances are good these days they're delivering that in a pretty secure configuration, pretty well set up. If you bought your own and you own your own, just a couple suggestions. One is make sure you change the password on that device. The defaults are widely published on the internet. 2, set up the Wi-Fi security to WPA2. That's the more secure of the options it gives you. And choose a password for Wi-Fi access that your neighbors and other people driving by are not likely to guess. That's about it. The rest of that is pretty good out of the box. There's some, if you're geeky on your router, you can go read the how-to guides on the internet. But for the most part, changing the password, setting a Wi-Fi password, setting it to WPA2 will get you where you need to go. Last piece, just want to talk about some safe behaviors. Most of these we've already talked about, so I'm just going to put them up on the screen. See if there's anything new here that we haven't already hit. Backups, I put it on there twice, and I've already mentioned it a couple times, so I think you maybe got the message. If you have data that you really care about, like all your pictures of your family, I would make 3 copies of those. Why not? Because you really don't want to lose them and have to explain why you don't have any pictures anymore. I would have an archived copy of the files I cared about far away from the internet, right? And again, it could be, well, you can put it on the cloud if you have it in a, cloud storage you trust, but not connected directly to your machine at all, not in a sync kind of mode. Yeah. Yes, sir?
I hear that emails are unsafe to send. If you were sending your tax returns to somebody, would that be something you don't want to do on your email, or how come?
Yeah, I mean, somebody could intercept that email, right? Emails get stored and forwarded, so they hop around different servers to get to their destination. And somebody who had compromised one of those could theoretically intercept that. Honestly, we don't see a lot of attacks like that. If you look at the reports on how real attacks happen, that one's not real common. You have to go after highly protected infrastructure, AT&T and Microsoft and people like that are hard to break into. So it doesn't happen that often, but it's not secure, right? So most people, like CPAs, will have a website where you can upload your taxes to that website, or when they send you back your tax return, they'll send you an email with a link in it, and you click the link, and then you can download from them. That's a safer way to do it. The other thing you can do is you can put a password on there. So you can, put it as a zip file, right? Compress it into a zip file, or put a password on with if you're making PDFs, I think you can password protect those with Adobe Reader. So you could password protect it and then send it to them by email. I would ask them if they have a website where they do secure file exchange. It's an easier, better way to do it. Serves a lot of other purposes too, right? Other than just protecting that transit. Emails can get lost in the inbox of the person you're sending it to. So doing it on a website where there's some tracking and controls is typically a better way. Here's a couple of, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, when Safari is up and I'm on the web, when I click preferences, it's like a password manager sheet comes up, and in order to get it to show up, I have to put in my computer password. So it's like a password manager, but it's nothing it's kind of automatic.
But it's in Safari. It's Safari memorizing your passwords.
Yeah.
So, yeah, good question. So all browsers do that, not just Safari, but they'll offer to remember your password, store your password, whatever. So that can be our password manager. To me, I don't have enough control of that, right? It's all happening. Then when I log in, it automatically puts it in. I don't get to see it. I don't get to do it. I don't want to spend enough time worrying about how to make sure nobody can hack my browser to do that. I mean, a lot of the hacks we've talked about, browsers are one of the targets, right? I mean, that's the software that's running when you're on a website. So I don't like that method. I mean, it's real easy. It's real convenient. For the passwords I would care about, my financials, that kind of thing, I would use a separate password manager program. So for, I don't know, your house account, or, what is the, where you're just, I'm remodeling my house, I have a house account, like, catalogs, or things where you're not doing transactions, that may be fine for a convenience factor. I wouldn't look at it as particularly secure, although again, it's not inherently insecure. It's just, my preference would be get a piece of software, keep all your passwords there, you control them, you manage them, you give them to the websites you want to give them to. It's a little less convenient. I think it's worth it. Your mileage can vary. Other questions? Yes, sir.
Real quick one, how serious are cookies?
Not. So cookies get used for a lot of things. Knowing who you are so you can pick up where you left off, right? So there's all kinds of beneficial things about them. People that are very paranoid about their privacy, their personal habits, not wanting people to track them for marketing purposes, you may want to disable cookies or clean them up or whatever. I like the convenience of being able to go use the internet for all the wonderful things it does, right? So I don't worry about that. I don't worry so much about the fact that Amazon knows what I've searched on yesterday and can correlate that with what I'm searching on today. You know, and I get targeted ads because of it. I like that. So that's a personal privacy call more than a security call. They don't represent a security risk per se. There questions?
When in doubt, have children, because your children probably know how to do your technology. The second thing, that our two children who, are, well, they don't like to be our tech support. Dad, go look at Google, go look at the YouTube.
Yeah.
So YouTube, I learned more things off YouTube in terms of how to eliminate my cookies.
Yeah.
Personally, I know where the cookies are in our pantry, but, YouTube will tell you so many things. So, thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you. And this is my takeaway exercise. So think about how you would react if you go home today and all your electronics have been eaten by your dog. Be the guy in the right-hand column. Thank you very much. Appreciate it.